Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Ellie's Place, Filling the Gap. I'm Amanda Lang, and I am so delighted to be with you this evening as your moderator and guide in a conversation with the amazing people that we have assembled here tonight. I can't wait to get to all of that. I want to start on behalf of Ellie's Place by thanking our appreciation and thanking the Stacey Levitt Athletic and Educational Fund, Toronto Foundation, and the Levitt family for their generous support for this educational webinar. And I would also like to thank Hope Plus Me MDAO for their help sharing this webinar broadly within their network. And to that point, a few housekeeping details to share with you. You will notice that we have removed the chat function. That's just to avoid distraction while this is going on. The Q&A function, though, is alive and well, and we hope that you use it. We are going to have a question and answer period with this amazing group of panelists. You're going to have a lot of questions, I know, as you hear from them. So while I will be leading the conversation, it will, I hope, be your questions that we're really focused on. You can use the Q&A function for that. And if you run into any technical problems whatsoever, that's the button to use as well. Go to the Q&A. Our staff is watching it, and they will be able to, or they'll do their best to try to help you. And as you may also know, this is being recorded, this session, and a link will be sent to you within the next day or two. Thank you for all who've already submitted questions. So we're looking forward to that. We do want to note, we're aware that a conversation about mental illness, and we may hear some very deeply personal things tonight, can trigger uncomfortable feelings. And if you find anything in the panel discussion causes you discomfort that you want to talk to somebody about, we do want to share with you a phone crisis line that will be in the chat periodically throughout the evening. So we are aware of the emotions that may be caused here. I want to share with you a little bit about why I'm here. Partly it is because I was introduced to Ellie's Place as a concept by my amazing sister-in-law, Susanna Glatsova, who is a board member. She's a member of the board. And then I met David and Deborah Cooper. And of course, if you know them, you know it is to be awed and humbled to know their story as parents, as individuals who endured one of the great tragedies that would have simply floored most of us. And then they used their tragedy to make the lives of other young people and families better and literally save lives. And so in knowing them, I have been grateful and really inspired. Elsewhere, I know, like so many people, a huge number of people who do have great needs, great need of mental support, of a variety of kinds. And what you see, of course, is that we live particularly in a country where there's a lot of support for the very young, and there is support for people well into adulthood, but there is a gap. There is a gap for young adults, especially those living with mental illness, that could be supported better. And so when I knew about Ellie's Place in talking to David and Deborah, it felt so natural to me that it's a thing to support and to be part of. And I hope that I'm sure you'll all feel the same way. This evening's program includes some amazing speakers who come from a variety of backgrounds with a rich and deep knowledge of both this kind of care and the care in general, the space in general. You will hear from this evening Carol Cowan-Levine, who is the board chair of Ellie's Place, sharing some of the accomplishments and successes that have been noteworthy over this past year. You will also hear from you'll hear from Susan Joyce and John Kingdom, a very personal story about navigating the system and the troubles and turbulence, I'm sure, that goes along with it. You will hear about some of the questions about why we need residential care, what this is about, and how it might look with Dr. Joel Shapiro. And then Tamara McKernan from Gould Farm, which is a US-based system that Ellie's Place is modeled on. Of all the places in the world that are in place now, that work, that show success, Gould Farm is the one that Ellie's looked to as a model. So we'll hear from Tamara about what works there and why it works. And then finally, Ellis Katzoff, the executive director of Ellie's Place, will fill you in on the latest on what's happening. You're here because presumably you support at least the concept of Ellie's Place. He'll give you a sense of what the future holds and how we get there. And then once you've had a chance to digest all of that, we will move to the Q&A with this amazing group of people and get some of your questions answered. So I'm going to start with Carol Cowan-Levine, who is with us and has many of you will know, is a wonderful chair of the board of Ellie's Place, giving her time, but she has given her time and her energy and her efforts to this space of psychotherapy and healthcare in general for her whole career. And she's done it professionally, and she's done it through her not-for-profit support work. Carol, over to you.
Thanks so very much, Amanda. It is really wonderful to be able to have the opportunity this evening to not simply be a face on a homepage of a wonderful website. And the first words that I would like to begin with are the words of appreciation to you, Amanda Lang, business journalist, author, TV host, and so invested in time and energy in Ellie's Place. It is with heartfelt appreciation that we all say thank you to you for emceeing this very special webinar. And of course, appreciation to all who have helped tonight come to fruition. We can't forget those either. It is a privilege to be the chair of the board of directors of Ellie's Place, of which I have held this position for 2 years. Governance is a key factor in this, not only in terms of where we have come from, but where we are headed. We are an incorporated, not-for-profit board of directors, explicitly governed by a set of bylaws, policies, and procedures. But we are also a collaborative, interactive, intelligent, talented board that is really able to challenge one another, listen to new thoughts, and have good results. Accountability is key. Accountability is about everything we do, how we communicate to you, how we ask for dollars, how those dollars are spent, what we have done, what the next steps will look like. And it is about that accountability and our journey in the past 18 months that I would like to speak to you about this evening. COVID has left no one untouched, not even Ellie's Place. In front of you is a slide that really speaks to our journey in the last 18 months of activity. The green, the inverted triangle of this diamond, is really the Ellie's Place board, probably walking through green pastures. In January of 2020, we had identified criteria in an area of Dufferin County, looking at property, going through environmental scans, talking about our footprint, the footprint of Ellie's Place, how we would move forward, what this would look like, what partnerships would be. And indeed had found a dream place in which we put in a conditional offer in March of 2020. Very excited about. We then proceeded to move to hiring a capital campaign fundraiser, expertise in capital campaigns, launched ourselves into a feasibility study with COVID descending and lockdowns in place to really know whether or not we could raise the dollars we needed to for this wonderful place. What we learned by the middle of May was that this would not be possible, that even the most traditional, not-for-profit, long-standing could not generate the dollars at any level that were normally coming to them, and certainly a not new face, new not-for-profit, fresh start would be able to deliver the outcome of the millions of dollars that would be required. May 29th, we withdrew our offer of purchase on this property, and it was a loss. We were quite somber at that point in time. I drew upon James Thurber's words, look not back in anger, nor forward in fear, but around in awareness. And we did indeed do just that. So the upper triangle in the yellow is in fact June 2020 to June 2021, where we find ourselves today. We established 3 very active task groups: social enterprise, about innovation in funding, new ways of thinking, community bonds, what the other possibilities were for us out there. Campaign readiness task group, how to ready for the traditional fundraising model, find the leaders we needed, search out the resources that were required, be prepared. And of course, partnerships with other mental health organizations, partnerships in the community, and of our most important partner, the government of Ontario. In fact, this evening in our foray in that task group, MPP Kuh has joined us this evening, a champion for Ellie's Place, and we are indeed most appreciative. We also secured a dozen letters from leaders in the mental health field in the GTA and beyond, from the largest and most resounding institutions that currently exist and are spokespeople for, that really have lent their support to us in the foray into the government. Albeit that this has been a period of COVID and very little else, we know our time will come. From the outcomes of that extremely monumental amount of work to the end of 2020 were the foundational pieces that really informed our work from January to March in our strategic plan. That plan was approved in March of 2021. That plan has 6 strategic directions to it. And with that, one of the first in this 2 to 3 year strategic plan is to purchase or lease a property within the first year of that strategic plan. The other strategic direction: recruit, hire a full-time executive director, ensure strategic partnerships that will deliver success, really be able to know our financial models and planning, and thus move forward in a very clear, accountable way. Within this strategic plan are clear deliverables, clear targets, people responsible, how we can move this and move this forward in a way that we need to. So out of a year and a half of what I would say was indeed adversity, I would say there has been growth, innovation, and considerable learning. To borrow a phrase from another organization, I would say that we as a board have built back better. I am a registered psychotherapist in my daily life. I am well aware of the suffering that is out there. I am indeed aware of the vast limitations in resources, the egregious timelines that have impacted all. Nonetheless, I do feel that there is the time in which knowing what Ellie's Place has to offer, the way that it has been viewed as the essential piece that is missing in our mental health landscape, that our time of reflection is complete, that it is now our time of doing, and I would ask, if not now, when? Throughout the course of this evening, you will hear answers to many of your whys, and with that, I hope you will then take this journey with us in bringing Ellie's Place to fruition. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Carol, for a wonderful presentation. And it is so true that at a time like this, imagine being tested in this way in this past year, but that transparency and accountability and the note of optimism goes a long way. So thank you so much for that. And I do want to mention, which I may have forgotten, that there is closed captioning available to all. If you want to turn it on, you can do so at the bottom of your screen. So please make use of that as you wish. And it gives me great pleasure now to introduce Dr. Susan Joyce and Dr. John Kingdom. Susan and John met at medical school in Dublin, came to Canada with their 3 children in 1998. And Susan, who was born and raised in Ireland, is now a family physician in Toronto with a deep interest in mental health, professional interest. John is a professor and chair of obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Toronto, and also a high-risk pregnancy physician at Mount Sinai Hospital. We are delighted to have both of you with us. Susan and John, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you to all at Ellie's Place for giving us this opportunity tonight to be part of helping to fill this gap in healthcare for young adults in Ontario with serious mental illness. We want to share with you all a bit about our family's experience and the challenges we encountered a few years ago when our son was very unwell. We're just one of many families going through situations like this, and I hope that hearing this story will bring greater understanding to the gap that exists. And I believe that the more understanding there is, the greater the chance that we will succeed in giving our youth the care that they so need. Our son has agreed to our speaking with you here today, and he supports the goals of Ellie's Place fully. As a family doctor, I believe that there is no health without mental health. And as a formerly uprooted person, an immigrant at one time, my experience is that belonging and having roots in a community are essential to health, and especially if one is to thrive. I hope that our story today will help you to realize how important we believe this to be. We have three wonderful children. They're all unique. Our youngest, our son, started university about 6 years ago, far away, and he became quickly depressed. Despite many types of health assistance, he grew more ill, and finally, about 3 years ago, after months of having cut himself off from our family, he had a breakdown and he was admitted to hospital. He spent about 4 months there in two different units. He was attended by 6 different psychiatrists, as well as many nurses, social workers, and many other caregivers. And then he was discharged to another physician's care and a community program, which was the best available to him in Ontario. During his time in the hospital, staff turnover was constant, and the staff rarely even recognized me on my daily visits. Often they didn't really know who my son was or where he was, which greatly disturbed me. Many of the staff appeared to be burnt out, unwell, or gruff at times. Violence broke out on 2 occasions when I visited, and the atmosphere was very tense and fearful. Those who cared for him in an authentic way stood out, and I'm forever grateful to them. He still mentions one nurse who took him out for walks and had conversations, and she made a big impact. That time in our lives is one we will never forget. Our son's life had become unrecognizable to him, and his future was unimaginable to him. He had been on one particular path, and now he seemed to have no path at all. I'm grateful that he's alive. I'm grateful that he was supported through one of the most dangerous and difficult times in his life. His state of health at that time was truly shocking to us all, and our family reeled and grieved. His diagnosis was speculative. No prognosis was ever given, and he was left dangling. Over the months that followed at home through the winter, he continued to struggle, continued to be depressed, and seemed hopeless. To his credit, however, he cooperated fully with all his care team. He took his medications daily, and he never missed an appointment. As a family, we coped quietly, but in fear at times. Our home was safe, but it was sad and anxious, and so it likely wasn't the most restorative of environments for one to heal from a serious illness. He remained very depressed in spite of his program. We sought help and advice from anyone we could find: family, friends, colleagues, the internet. Our daughters helped out too, and they contacted many residential programs in and out of the province, even visiting some themselves, as we couldn't see recovery coming from the situation in which we were. We felt he needed more help, and we felt he needed a different environment altogether. The available residential programs in Ontario at that time were all private. They couldn't offer the medical support he needed. Most had a consulting physician who only visited about once a week. There were some programs that focused on substance abuse and others on for those leaving correctional facilities. So none of these was a good fit for our son's needs. We spoke to people in BC and in Quebec, trying to find the right situation and support. A friend connected us with a consultant in the US who had knowledge of many of the programs available there. Then I looked into out of province programs in the US, supported by OHIP. There are 7 of these in total, which is proof that the fact that there is a gap is acknowledged. I hoped to find a program that would be a good fit for him and one covered by OHIP. So I contacted all of these programs, and our son was interviewed by phone and accepted onto the wait list for Rogers Memorial. The program they recommended and offered to him, however, was not one on the OHIP list, and therefore it wasn't eligible for prior approval. We applied anyway, and we were declined. Later, I wrote to the health minister to point out this gap, that there were services available, residential services available for those with eating disorders, anxiety, depression, PTSD, and OCD, but none for other diagnoses. I was appalled to find this out, this lack of equity. I wrote that I couldn't understand how those with serious illnesses could be further disadvantaged by not being eligible for these types of programs. Her reply was simply that these were the programs that their medical advisors had chosen to be covered. Frustrated and worried, I then called Family Navigation Program at Sunnybrook, and they were very, very helpful and supportive. And they seemed to understand our son's needs and ours as well. Around this time, we heard of a residential program in the US for young adults with serious illness, and we met with a young man who had been there and his father. They told us that the program had saved his life. We decided to visit, and we had a lengthy interview, and our son immediately, to my surprise, expressed his keen desire to go there. The process was gentle and kind. After a few weeks on the waitlist, he entered the program, and immediately he seemed to be more hopeful. The people welcomed him to this grand old house on the side of a hill. They called him by his name. They introduced him to everyone there. They seemed like old friends. He shared a cigarette in the garden gazebo with another resident, and I saw the two of them laughing. It felt like a big family. The milieu was warm, friendly, and kind, a whole new experience on this journey. We were invited in to have lunch with everyone, and we joined with the staff and residents in cleaning up afterwards. This sense of community togetherness and acceptance and appreciation of each person was palpable, and was one of the most healing aspects of this place, in my opinion. Because he trusted these people and respected them, he could hear the many positives about himself that others expressed, and he began to believe in himself again. This deep knowing was made possible by the residential model. The living together in community was transformative. For the first time on this journey, I trusted and believed that our son could get well. He attended different psychotherapies and psychoeducation programs every weekday about topics like freedom through structure, substance abuse, medications, and he did some exercise, meditation, yoga. They went on outings to libraries, cafes, things like that. He even volunteered to teach math to adults in a community centre, taking public transport alone to these sessions. It wasn't only these activities that were themselves healing, of course, but being together in this safe, trusting, and nurturing environment for weeks on end, 24/7. In our phone calls, what we heard most about were the stories that others shared with him about their lives, their illnesses, their families, their choices. In this environment of safety and sharing, he gained an enormously deep understanding of his illness, which has stayed with him. He told us of those who had lost their jobs, lost their marriages, those who were trying again, of those who had stopped their medications, had many admissions, many regrets as well. He still keeps in touch with some of the people there. Every staff member interacted in a warm and authentic way, genuinely interested in every resident. Both non-professional and professional staff had these qualities, and the culture was one of total acceptance of each resident's individuality and personhood. I believe that this factor to be essential to the success of any therapeutic model. I'd like to hand over to John now, who will wrap up our talk with you. Thank you so much for listening and your support for Ellie's Place.
Thank you, everyone. So we went and met Theo at Pearson Airport, and we could not believe our son walking towards us. So clean cut and healthy, and our family's become much stronger and healthier and a lot more connected. And then his recovery is ongoing. He's developed a wide range of creative skills in photography, coding, and digital media. He's a great self-learner. He started a business with two friends, making music videos for releases, and he's hoping to get into event planning after lockdown ends. A booster of what he had gained at the residential program would have been very welcome to him over the last 2 years. And indeed, a visit was planned back in March of 2020. He was so looking forward to seeing people again, and sharing stories because he was truly proud of his hard work and his progress. Alas, COVID prevented this from happening, and it's been a difficult pandemic for all of us. The day the lockdown was declared was also the day when Theo, our son, was due to start a peer mentorship program at his university, something he really wanted to do and was not formally present. He still hopes he can get this going one day. Anyway, together, this is our story to this point. We thank you for listening, for your time, and for your support of something so important as Ellie's Place today and in the future to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for your story, for sharing your son's story, and please accept our gratitude to him for allowing us to hear his story and how powerful it is, because we know as parents particularly that there is no arbitrary age or stage at which our care and love stops, but there can be some arbitrary rules and regulations out there that make it hard for us to give them the support. And we also know, as your story demonstrates, and it makes me emotional to think of it, is how lucky your son is, and it shouldn't be that hard for you. It shouldn't have been that hard, but he's a lucky young man, and thank you for sharing that. It gives me great pleasure now to welcome a member of the board of Ellie's Place, Dr. Joel Shapiro. He's a psychiatrist with the Medical Clinic for Person-Centered Psychotherapy in Toronto, but has a special interest in long-term in medical professionals' understanding of mental health issues. He took special training and supervision in dialectical behavior therapy and cognitive behavior therapy. He chairs for Ellie's Place the Models and Program Evaluation Committee. Joel, thank you very much. Over to you.
Great, thank you so much. It's great to be talking to everyone tonight. So again, yeah, I'm Dr. Joel Shapiro, and I was actually just looking up before here, how long have I been on the board of Ellie's Place? Almost 5 years. So it's been really exciting to be a part right from sort of the early beginnings to then hiring an executive director. And there's certainly been ups and downs, but I think it's a great time to be part of Ellie's Place, and there's a lot of reasons to be hopeful going forward. So I'm just going to share my slides here. Okay. So, going backwards. So today I just wanted to spend a bit of time talking about the gap that we're trying to fill here with Ellie's Place, and to try to characterize it in a few different ways, just so people have sort of a better understanding of that. So to start off, what's the scope of this problem? Well, when it comes to young people, and these statistics are from the CAMH website, they say that 70% of mental health problems have their onset in childhood and adolescence. So it's a key time of life to intervene if we're going to do so. And young people aged 15 to 24 are more likely to experience mental illness or substance use than any other age group. So most of the people that are going to be suffering are in this age range, and treating them is going to have a huge impact later on. So let's talk about this gap. Well, there's a lack of resources for young adults. And the reason I picked this age range from 19 to 35 is that's really the age range that Ellie's Place is going to be targeting. And it's especially in terms of long-term residential treatment, which you just heard in the previous story. So where does long-term residential treatment fit in? Well, it's important to think of mental illness as having a spectrum of treatment intensity. So this could range from a really sort of light touch treatment, maybe just having a 10-minute conversation with a family doctor, getting a pamphlet, or being recommended a self-help book. And then as you ratchet up the intensity, next step might be referring for a consultation to CAMH for 1 or 2 visits. Or maybe a little bit more intense would be being referred to a program like where I work, where we do longer term psychotherapy, and that's in an outpatient setting, but following people up for longer. And perhaps even more intense would be like a hospital-based outpatient program, a multidisciplinary team. Going up the ladder next would be an inpatient admission, which you heard in the previous story is often how things begin in sort of severe mental illnesses, with an inpatient admission, which can last as long as a few days to months. And then what about at the top rung of the ladder? What happens to those folks who continue to struggle and need a longer term treatment in order to establish life skills? What about these folks who can't, don't possess the skills to be able to tolerate, say, a formal training program or an education program or competitive employment, given the experience that they're having. Well, unfortunately, that's where the gap exists. And as you climb up that ladder, you get to the top, and there's nothing there. It's not that nothing exists in the world, because as we've just heard, there are programs that exist in the world. There are several programs in the United States, and the government is aware of them. And in fact, you heard about this sort of arduous process to try to get people referred to these programs. They will technically be covered by OHIP. And when we were doing our research in Ellie's Place, we found that between 2014 and 2017, the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care sent 50 individuals with serious mental illness to the United States at a total cost of $4.3 million. It's a lot of money, and especially when you think of the fact that, if we had a program here that could support jobs and the economy here, as well as just not having to uproot people and send them to the States. So, I'm leading to the point that there's a desperate need for a rural residential treatment center that focuses on recovery for people over the age of 18. And the recovery is the other key part of the gap, because not only is there a gap in treatment intensity, but there's also a gap with respect to the type of treatment. And to differentiate, before I go to that, I thought of an analogy, and I think this highlights the need for this program. Some of the feedback we got when we started raising money was, isn't Ellie's Place going to actually treat only a very small number of people? And the answer is yes, but there's a greater benefit to society at large for having the most intense types of treatments. And if you think about a ventilator bed, which this is a picture of, a very tiny number of people are on ventilators at any given time. But there's certainly something that's worth having. And if you were to ask most people, how would you feel if ventilators were defunded? People would be up in arms, even though the odds that any given person is going to need a ventilator is really tiny. Even during COVID, I believe right now it's in the hundreds, and when you factor in that there's like 15 million people in Ontario, it's like a tiny percentage. But as we think about the worst case scenario, I get sick and I think, oh, wow, what's the worst case scenario? It's really reassuring to know, and I think it's for the benefit of the health of society to know that we have everything available up till the most intensive treatments. And in that analogy, it's the ventilator bed. And in our analogy, it's an intensive rural residential treatment program for mental health. So I was starting to explain the other way that there's a gap. And it's not only in treatment intensity, but also in the type of model. And I think that in the story you heard, it highlighted the difference between sort of the traditional model versus what we call we don't call it, it's well known to be called the recovery model. And it's just a different philosophy and a different approach to mental illness, where the focus is less on the clinical symptoms and more on meeting the person where they're at and helping to mutually create goals. It's sort of more person-centered and less about, say, symptom checklists. So for instance, if somebody was having auditory hallucinations and you were going to put them on a medication that was going to cause sedation and weight gain, you might collaborate with the patient and say, how bad are they? If it's a trade-off, would you rather sedation or would you rather auditory hallucinations? And maybe they don't bother that person. So the clinical significance is jointly discussed between the doctor and the patient to have that collaborative approach. And there's a shared control over how the treatment unfolds. So to summarize, focus on the person and quality of life as opposed to symptoms, emphasis on skill building, fostering help and self-efficacy, and individualized treatment, but that also focuses on incorporating family. And I think you heard about that, the benefit of that from the previous story. So to conclude, tonight is all about planting seeds. And will it cost a lot upfront to establish this highest level of treatment intensity? Absolutely. It's going to cost more in the short term. However, when you look at the economic analysis and the fact that we spent $4.3 billion sending people, I time myself and I'm out of time. No. When you factor in that we're already spending the millions of dollars, and in this analysis, again, from CAMH, that relative to the burden of mental illness, that healthcare in Ontario is underfunded by $1.5 billion, is certainly worth the money. So we end with this quote, that don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds you plant. And this is certainly something that's worth investing in the future.
Thank you so much for that, Joel. That is amazing context for the need, which many will see clearly as we go along here. But that gap that we're talking about, the need to fill, and I must say that analogy really rings true. And we heard this from Susan and John, which is the intense need, the intense care is not unlike a ventilator. It's life-saving. It's the last stage, but it is the most important. And in this case, if I can torture your analogy a little bit, with the recovery model, they take the life-saving tool with them, and it changes their life forever. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I want to welcome our next speaker, who comes from Gould Farm. As you've heard, there are residential treatment centers across the U.S., and Ellie's Place looked at all of them, and it was Gould Farm that was the most appropriate model to base Ellie's Place on. Tamara McKernan is from Gould Farm. We're delighted to have her here to talk a little bit about the model and the success, which has been benchmarked, which is also unusual and important. And just a quick note about Tamara. She's worked there for many years, first as a clinician, now as admissions director. She has her master's in social work and lives and works in the community with her family on the farm. And we're just delighted to have her here, crossing the border virtually. Tamara, over to you.
Thanks, Amanda. So it's really interesting to kind of listen as coming into this and hearing all the things, and just reflect back a little bit about my background is that I actually moved to the farm from New York City, and had been working in a public hospital on an inpatient residential unit for years, and really felt that it was treating one very small aspect of things for people, but not all of it, and not the human part of people, and just the most crisis and acute piece of somebody's experience. And I really felt like there had to be something else out there and a different way of going about things, and ended up moving out of the city and found Gould Farm and have been here ever since. So I am going to share my screen and explain a little bit about Gould Farm and how we do things here. So we are the first residential therapeutic community in the nation. We began, Will Gould and Agnes Gould began Gould Farm much with the same mission that it has today in 1913. Back then, people would come and live out their lives on the farm and gain all sorts of skills to be able to move forward in their lives, either moving on or staying here. We are located in Western Massachusetts, in the Berkshires, on 700 acres. Just to kind of give a picture of what the farm looks like. This is a picture of the garden, which currently our work teams are, I think they said today they planted 1,000 plants on the garden team today. So they are really, this is their high season. This is kind of just the view coming down the road from the farm. And this is one of our barns, what we call the pig palace, where we keep a lot of our litter of pigs. So we serve adults 18 and older. Our average ages are people in their 20s and 30s. We do sometimes have, sometimes right now we have a 19-year-old, and then we certainly have people in their 40s and 50s, but typically it's that age range of 20s and 30s that we are treating. we do treat a variety of mental health challenges. So really the whole gamut of what people struggle with, from schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, anxiety, depression, OCD. We are dual diagnosis informed. We are not. We are mental health focused. However, we do take, I would say, maybe 50% or less of our guests have struggled with substance abuse in their past. We ask our guests to have some level of sobriety prior to admission, and certainly a willingness to remain sober and to work with us around their sobriety. So attending AA, going to our recovery group that we have on site, those sorts of things in order to maintain their sobriety while they're here. We also have every person that comes to the farm sign an abstinence agreement that they are going to remain sober for the time that they're here.
Sorry, Tamara, I'm just going to interrupt you shortly. You are not screen sharing, so I just want to let you know. So if you can, yes.
It looks like I am.
No worries, no worries. Just wanted to give you a heads up.
Huh. Can people see it now?
I believe it's just loading right now.
Sorry.
No worries. Okay, we are good. You're ready to go.
Okay, I'm gonna go back. Huh. So my Prezi doesn't want to work very well. Well, we'll just go forward. I'll go back a little bit. So this was the pig palace that I was talking about. I apologize. And just some pictures from the farm. So also, one of the things that we need people to be kind of open to, they don't need to necessarily be fully on board with, but at least able to participate in work program and community living. So we ask people to come to the farm for admission. They're willing to engage in being in community, in working with a clinical team, and in being in work program. And so having the ability to do those things is important in what we treat. We do have some rule outs of people that we just don't have the capacity to treat, and that's history of violence, ongoing self-harm, cutting, active self-harm. We certainly work with people around suicidal ideation, but they need to be able to contract with us for their safety. We do also rule out any sexual offenders, given the nature of our community. So life on the farm, the way I think about what we do here at the farm is really 3 pillars. It's clinical services, work program, and residential life. And those three things are really integrated into a guests. We call the people that come here guests of the farm. They're not patients, they're guests. And so each one of these pillars really, we all work with each other, and really it makes up the life at the farm. So clinical services, each guest works one-on-one with a licensed social worker and attends groups. So we do individual psychotherapy, really meeting people where they're at. It's quite individualized. I would say in my work with people, I do a lot of kind of DBT focused and CBT focused, sometimes narrative. We do a lot of open dialogue within our meetings, using reflection in our work team reflection meetings. So we do we have a lot of meetings, network meetings where we're kind of gathering around, a team is gathering around a guest, and really helping them, support them in what they want to be accomplishing here at the farm, and giving feedback and reflecting on how things are going. We also do work team reflection meetings, and we also, do family meetings. So we ask everyone that comes needs to have a family partnership, and that's not just to support the person financially here, but it's really to support them in their treatment in an ongoing way. And so family meetings are an integral part of that, especially as somebody's transitioning and moving on from here. We have 2 consulting psychiatrists who are here once a week, but they're also on call to us 24/7. So because we live in community and we have so many different roles in what we're doing in community, we have a really great way of being able to monitor people's medication, and especially med changes, and are able to report that to the psychiatrist that can help collaborate with the guests around making those changes. Our clinical staff, work team leaders, and residential staff all collaborate and integrate treatment for our guests. And then we have a RN and medication management on site. Everyone gets their medication through the nursing office. And so people start out taking their meds in the nursing office. And as they move through the program, move to holding their own meds, checking in with the nurse to say, hey, I took my meds. And then as they do that, they are then able to just hold their meds and not have to check in. So work program, each week, guests have 28 hours of work therapy on one of our teams. This is kind of what stands out in regards our program from other programs in the country. We have probably the most robust work program out of the 5 therapeutic farms in the US. So when people come in, they join the Forestry and Grounds team, where they are able to kind of really orient themselves to the land. As I mentioned before, we're 700 acres. A lot of that is a very large network of trails in the forest. So they're maintaining our trails, they're chopping our firewood and stacking our wood and bringing it to houses in the winter. They're also responsible for tapping nearly 1,000 and hanging 1,000 buckets for our maple syrup production that we do every winter. One thing that I like to tell families in regards to the biggest difference that I learned in coming here from being in an inpatient hospital was where we took people's shoelaces and and gave them plastic cutlery when they ate, because it was about safety, and you didn't trust that people could keep themselves safe. And here, it is such an incredibly trusting environment that we allow people to have an axe to chop wood and be a part of that production in community. The garden team, as you saw in the picture, is planting from seed all of the vegetables that we grow on farm, and then harvest, and they coordinate with the kitchen team. The kitchen team is making all of our meals, 3 meals and a tea snack every day, 365 days a year, including some really large, pre-COVID, I guess, large events like Thanksgiving, where families, previous families and alumni often come back to share Thanksgiving with us. So we typically have up to 150 people for Thanksgiving. And so the kitchen team, people are working in the kitchen, learning all about the skills it's a fast-moving, fast-paced environment. They're learning recipes, they're learning knife skills, they're learning how to work in a small space with other people. The farm team is taking care of our animals. We are a dairy farm. We are a running dairy farm. We pasteurize all of our own milk our cows, make our own cheese. That milk then gets brought to the kitchen and roadside store and cafe, but also to the bakery, where it gets added to value-added products such as our own yogurt and ice cream that we make. The bakery makes all of our baked goods that we consume here in community. So they make all of our own breads and bagels and pastries and desserts. And so they're really learning. It's a really great team for cognition and learning the skills to follow a recipe and triple a recipe and getting temperatures just right. And again, this is always about relationship and working in a team with others. And then finally, the roadside store and cafe is our restaurant that's open 4 days a week for breakfast and lunch. And it is open to the public. It's been there a long time. And it's a really great way for guests as they're moving in transition to really test those skills and be able to work with the public and be in a bit more of a high stress situation. Work program often meets with guests to really give reflections in those work team reflection meetings to talk about what are the skills that they're using and what are their goals and how are we helping support them towards that. And then residential life. So there's 3 guest residences on the farm, and there's support for activities of daily living in the house. So the Resi advisors, which is what we call them, work in the house, and they're helping establish community within the house. They're also helping people with laundry or room maintenance or the interpersonal things that come up in living in a house with other people and figuring that out and helping navigate those things. Resi advisors also help with evening and weekend activities. We have the work program goes from 8 o'clock in the morning until about 4 o'clock. And then there are often activities that are happening in that 4 to 6 block before we have dinner or after 6. And there's those are not required, but encouraged for people to be able to step in and kind of explore what activities they want to be doing. And those things happen on the weekends as well. And then we also have off-campus town trips where people are going into town and maybe doing some grocery shopping or just navigating the stressors that come up with being in public spaces and more open in that way. This is a typical room at the farm. And then we have transition services. So one of the unique things about the farm is that we really value the continuum of care for our guests. So they have the option to participate in a variety of programs as they move through the farm. So having gone through the various stages here, which is typically kind of orientation, stabilization, moving through kind of that solid coordination of what's going on for them, and then moving into transition. They may move into one of our transition residences where they have their own structure outside of the house. And are doing what they would like to be doing as they move forward, but still have that really important piece of community and camaraderie with other guests and clinical case management where they're able to come back and have a safe place to live and to remain sober and to really still be a part of a community. So guests are supported while increasing their independent living skills. They are often volunteering or have paid work with a community partner that we are typically in touch with, and then can still participate in Gould Farm community events. So we have 2 transition houses. Fellside is located in Medford, Mass, which is just outside of Boston. And then O'Connell House is right here in Monterey as you're leaving the farm. And beyond both of those, people often move into supported transition, which is what we call non-residential support services, where people are able to be living on their own. Actually, people end up often finding roommates through each other, through the farm, and then move into shared living with people, especially in the city. We just had 2 residents from O'Connell House move into their own house out here in our area this week. So being able to move, they both went through the farm program, then were down at our transition house, and now have moved into their own house, but are staying connected through case management services, and will stay connected to the farm with their therapist and psychiatrist as well. And then there's the extended community, which has long-term support services, crisis support, and respite care. So they're still, guests are still connected to the farm, and still, if something comes up and they're feeling like they kind of need to reboot, or they need just a little bit more care, they can step back into community for a couple of weeks for respite care, and then go back to their lives, or really want to just continue to have that part of community be a part of their lives. We have some people in the Boston area that have been in extended community for 30 years. I think one of the things that that I added was, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, is the outcome study. So we've done an outcome study for over 20 years. And just a couple of quick facts from that. After the farm, the 6 months after the farm, 58% of our guests are in school or volunteering, and 42% have a paid job. 18 months after the farm, 68% have a paid job, and 19% are either in school or volunteering. So I really feel that the transition piece of things, and really helping people move slowly through what they're doing is incredibly helpful along their recovery path. And I think I'm probably out of time, so I'm going to stop talking. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Tamara, thank you so much for that. And yes, we could hear about Gould Farm all night, and there are already questions for you. So we're looking forward to more of that. But what a great way to see inside the house and inside the operations, and understand for people that are thinking, what will Ellie's Place be like? Knowing that this is a model gives us a bit of a something to hang on to and glimpse. So thank you very much for that. And that's a pretty good place to bring in our next speaker, because some of that will fall on his shoulders. Ellis Katzoff is the executive director of Ellie's Place. He himself has 38 years experience in the sector, in not-for-profit. He was the formerly CEO of Pathstone Mental Health. He's been with Ellie's Place since 2018, is an MSW, and is the one who will help to make the vision real. So Ellis, from you, we're hoping to get an update on what's happening with Ellie's Place and the future plans for filling the gap.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight on the webinar. I'm going to be your final speaker, and I'm going to hand it back to Amanda afterwards, who will facilitate the Q&A session. So first of all, let's share my screen. And now let's just chat a little bit. First, I want to tell you a little bit about the model, and then we're going to look into the future of it. Tamara and Joel have given you a great overview of the model. I'm going to repeat a little bit of what they said, but I think it will be helpful to try to piece together why we're following the Gould Farm model so closely. The first important component that I want to stress is Ellie's Place, like the Gould Farm, is going to be a long-term rural residential recovery and treatment program. And it's really important to remember about the recovery and treatment component, because that's what makes our programs so different. In the early years, the Ellie's Place board did some research and identified 33 programs around the world. Unfortunately, none were in Canada, but in many other countries, similar to the Gould Farm. Some board members went out and visited 3 programs in the state and just fell in love with the Gould Farm. I have to acknowledge for Tamara and all of her colleagues, the Gould Farm is the gold standard. It's been around 108 years. It's had extensive research, as Tamara said, and a 20-year outcome research study has been published, identifying why it's such a special program and why we want to emulate it here in Canada and help other organizations, groups spread it across the country. Ellie's Place is going to be a caring and intentional environment where we will help our guests see their ability to live with their illness and gain real life skills to do so. At Ellie's Place, they will join in a very safe, therapeutic community where the staff, volunteers, and guests work side by side to support one another and hold one another accountable. Our guests will begin to see the importance of community in their lives. They're identifying new possibilities by seeing other guests' successes and learn new skills for managing relationships while living with their serious mental illness. Clinically validated to improve mental health, the therapeutic and recovery community approach is particularly effective for individuals who have serious mental illness and sometimes concurrent diagnosis. So let's take a look at our program. The recovery component, which I want to start off with first, because that's what makes this program unique. We're going to have work programs very similar to the Gould Farm. All of our guests will spend a fair amount of time, Monday to Friday, usually, sometimes in the weekend, working on their organic farm, caring for small farm animals, probably like sheep and chickens and goats. Hopefully we'll find a property with maple trees and we'll have a maple syrup program like the one that Tamara described. Just for your information, when I first started at Ellie's Place, in the first month, I went down and visited the Gould Farm. It was in the middle of a winter storm, just as spring was arriving. And I went out with a work team and spent the morning hanging those metal maple syrup tins on many, many trees. I gained an incredible appreciation for the work program because I was out in the woods with four guests, and we talked a lot, very informally and candidly, about the importance of the work program in their lives. Part of our program will probably be an apiary program where we'll have beehives and we'll harvest the honey. Some guests will be building and maintaining our hiking trails through our forest. Some guests will want to work in the kitchen, developing skills working in restaurants and preparing the food. Others will work on property management. We'll have some sort of social enterprise program, probably selling our goods from the farm like honey, maple syrup at local farmers markets. And again, as Tamara said, we'll have a very strong transition program and a family support program. The transition program initially won't have houses, but we will work with our guests to find them appropriate housing as they move from the farm back to their community. And again, we'll have in our downtime, we'll have recreation activities, life skill programs, and exercise programs as well on the farm. To support the recovery program, there's going to be the treatment program with therapy, one-to-one, group therapy, medication monitoring at a wellness center with a nurse on site, similar to the Gould Farm, art therapy, music therapy, and once again, the transition program and family support. And we learned very much from the Gould Farm, it's important to evaluate your program on an ongoing basis, figuring out what works, how it works, what can be modified, what can be changed. So we'll have a director of evaluation and research from day one. We'll also have a relationship with the local university who will be assisting us in evaluation. And we've also been in discussions with CAMH, and they're very keen on supporting our evaluation activities as well. So that gives you an overview in a little bit less detail than Tamara went into. But as we said, we want to replicate the Gould Farm as best as we can because we know it works. So let's take a look under the hood, so to speak, about Ellie's Place. Now, this is a rendering that an architect friend of Ellie's Place did for us. we acknowledge right up front that the pictures you're going to see will change once we find a property, and the buildings will be designed specifically to suit that property. But the inside of the buildings, the floor plans I'm going to show you, all the rooms are going to be contained in the building, whatever design it eventually takes. This large building will be our community hub, the center of all of our programming that's not out in the work programs. There's going to be our administration offices, an exercise room, an art and craft therapy room, the wellness center will be there. Hopefully we'll have a computer lab, a music therapy room. We'll have a large industrial kitchen and a dining room that will sit 60 people in family style tables with 6 to a table where the guests and the staff and the volunteers and family members are visiting. They'll all eat together at small family tables. We'll also have a great room, a large living space where individuals, the guests and staff volunteers will be able to socialize. And we'll also have a variety of rooms. We're going to have 3 residents similar to the Gould Farm, and I'll talk about those in a moment. Let's just take a bird's eye view. Now, I want to stress this is a rendering that the architect put together just to tell people generally what Ellie's Place will look like. The farm, that small little garden area next to the big community hub, will actually be 5 to 10 acres of farming, but it gives you a sense that we will have a farm. And the 3 houses or residents that are at the back of the great community hub will be positioned in some fashion around the community center based on the actual physical lay of the land of the property that we do purchase. So let's look inside. This is the community hub. As you can see, there's lots of open space. All the meeting rooms are around the outside of the building. There's a large, on the right-hand side, on the top of the picture, you'll see the industrial kitchen. And then below that, lots of small dining tables, family-style tables. And to the left of that is a large community socializing area with many different seating configurations of couches and chairs and tables, so people can sit in all different kinds of configurations. In front of that, there will be a small exercise room, and then all around the outsides, there will be the group meeting rooms, the therapy rooms, and the staff rooms. This is one of 3 residents. Again, the actual configuration of the building might change depending on the lay of the land, but they will all have 14 bedrooms. Every 2 bedrooms will share a washroom. There will be a laundry room and a storage facility. In the center, there will be a room for a quiet library and a kitchenette that will be able to provide snacks, and the snacks could be prepared by the guests in the evenings and on the weekends, and a large living space area. And part of the central area will be the office for a resident advisor, as well as their bedroom and bathroom as well. We'll have 3 of these, which will give us 42 beds. We'll eventually have 40 guests, and 2 beds will be used for respite. For when individuals might come back when they're living in the community and they need a little time to figure out some rough patches they're having in the community living, and we'll be able to help them develop strategies to overcome their challenges, and then they can go back to the community. So that's a bit of an overview of our model. I want to talk to you about how we're going to make that happen in the next 2 to 3 years. The strategic plan that Carol mentioned at the beginning of the webinar is going to roll out in the following way. The first task we have, challenge, is to have a small capital campaign to buy or lease the property. We're looking at $4 million. And the sooner this can happen, the sooner our dream will come true. Once we have the $4 million, we're going to buy the property as soon as possible. Our strategic plan says no later than March 31st, 2022. Our preferred goal is much sooner. Hopefully this fall, if we can find 2 or 3 individuals or even 1 to help us purchase that property. That's going to be the key to unlock the rest of our dream. Once we do that, we'll have a capital campaign to raise funds to construct our buildings. At this point, our best analysis is the campaign will be between $10 and $16 million. And the range is, the board might choose to open with the community hub and 1 residence, as well as the barn and the workshop, those buildings. But we might only build 1 residence for 14 guests initially, and then build the second one a few years down the road and the third one a few years down the road. Or the board might decide, depending on how the campaign's going and other factors, to build all 3 residents at the same time. Our strategic plan says this will be done by March 31st, 2023 or sooner. If we buy the property sooner, all of this happens sooner. So that's really our preferred goal. Then we construct the buildings. It's a 9 to 12 month construction period from April 1, 2023 to March 31st, 2024 or sooner. Once again, if we buy the property this fall rather than March 31st, 2022, everything else happens much, much faster. While we're constructing the buildings, the staff will be recruited and trained. We've always, when I was down at the Gould Farm, I already had initial discussions with their executive director, Lisanne, about sending our initial staff group down to the Gould Farm for a week or 2 of training and purchasing the service from the Gould Farm so that our staff will be trained with the best. And our strategic plan has us opening for service April 2024 or sooner. And that's the whole goal of our strategic plan. How fast can we move this journey up and begin providing this incredible service to our guests? I hope that gives you a quick overview of our next steps and how we're going to bring our dream to life. On that note, I want to thank you, and I want to pass it back to Amanda for a Q&A.
And thank you, Ellis, and don't go anywhere. I'm going to now invite all of our presenters to turn on their cameras and their microphones and join us for a Q&A. We have been hearing from the attendees, lots of questions. So I want to get to them. And Ellis, I'm going to put you right on the spot. Sorry if you thought you were going to get a break here.
No, go ahead.
One of the pertinent questions that has come up, and we've heard this theme, but how will Ellie's Place address the issue of concurrent substance abuse or self-medication with the treatment of some underlying mental health issue? What's your approach?
The approach is very similar to the Gould Farm, and we learned it from them when I went down and visited them and figured out how they deal with it. As Tamara said, our expectations will be that they will agree not to use any substance while they're at Ellie's Place. If they're still really struggling with substance abuse or substance use, we'll refer them to a rehab program. And when they finish the rehab program, they'll be able to come into Ellie's Place. We acknowledge that a large number of our guests will probably have challenges with different substance use, and that's part of their journey. And we'll be there to help them deal with those issues as they go through the program at Ellie's Place.
Thank you. Susan and John, I have to tell you that we've had a lot of people thanking you for your story and your son's story. So I want to make sure you know how grateful our attendees are for that. One of the questions that we've had is which of the mental health professionals was the most had the most impact, if you could say that, on your son's recovery? Was it the psychologists, social workers, psychiatrists, coaches, mentors? Can you identify kind of which element it was that really worked for him?
I saw that question and I decided not to try to answer it because really it wasn't one particular person. That's the whole point. It's the whole team. It's the whole community. It's the whole experience of being with the other guests. Everybody working together. It's a sort of organic solution. It's not one person. And I think when one trusts one person, one can trust other people. And so the whole sense of trust is pervasive and very healing.
Thank you for that. And Joel, there's obviously a lot of curiosity around understanding the process. And one particular question is, how does a family know and what should they be looking for if a person in their family needs residential care? What would you suggest are sort of signs that say this is the right treatment?
Well, I think the people that we're most looking to help are the folks who've gone up the ladder, using the analogy I used before, folks that desperately want to get better and to find their place, but they keep finding that the services they're accessing aren't meeting their needs. So if somebody at the first signs of depression said, we would want to go straight to Ellie's place, probably our feedback would be, we don't know if that level of intensity is necessary, right? Perhaps there could be sort of a ramping up, right? So I think it's about, to some extent, not that we would want everyone to go through the same trying experience that's being described, but that there has been attempts every step of the way, and that at the stage where someone would be sort of thinking about Ellie's place, it would be kind of the logical next step where they've ramped up and tried all the things in between. Because I think that there are a lot of people who never reach my level of intensity. What I do as an outpatient psychiatrist, and in fact, sometimes people who meet me, they say, I tried 5 antidepressants and they didn't work. Have you ever seen that? And I say, I only see that. Because if you try one antidepressant and it works, you don't get referred to me. So there is an experience that occurs, and by the time we would be meeting someone with Ellie's place, I think they would know they need to be there and they'd be ready for our service.
Tamara, can you just reflect on that? I mean, in the U.S. there is less of a gap, although it sounds like this is a gap that could be filled better everywhere. Would you agree with that there's a kind of an intensity that comes along with it, and that maybe, I'm actually wondering whether for, as with Susan and John's son, the other people there and that intensity isn't part of what works?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a gap. We're one of 5 therapeutic farms in the United States, and we are the only residential treatment in the United States that offers financial aid from the get-go. So there's very few places that people get to go to. I think similar to what Dr. Shapiro was saying is we see that people have tried things and it hasn't worked, that the hospital becomes a revolving door, or people have been stuck in their parents' house and just outpatient isn't enough. It's not, I hear time and time again, I can go and get a job, but I can't keep a job. I can't get past that anxiety, or I can't motivate myself, or my people don't usually use the word symptoms, but like things get in the way that I can't do it. And so being able to do it in support with other people that have similar struggles to you and build that self-confidence and build those skills is incredibly valuable to people.
And Joel, we've heard this issue of kind of the diagnostic criteria, right? That there are some things that will rule somebody out from this kind of treatment and care. What's the model for Ellie's place?
Well, as far as the criteria that would, rule someone out, it's mainly centered around safety, because, we're not planning to have like a prison-like facility or a locked-down facility. That's not our intent whatsoever. So someone would at least need to be safe enough that they would be motivated and want to enter the program and wouldn't be running away or attempting to harm themselves in some way. That's not to say we would rule out someone with a history of self-harm, say, but we would just need to have that kind of reassurance and checking with them to have some sort of a contract. Again, if somebody was violent and had a history of violent charges, that would unfortunately also be something that would rule someone out. However, in working with the recovery model, we've tried to not make Ellie's place about meeting some sort of like clinical threshold where you need to have a specific diagnosis or a certain number of symptoms, because we rather base it on the function, like someone's functional outcomes and their lived experience, rather than do you have this particular symptom. So there's no one diagnosis which would be an absolute exclusion. Particularly challenging diagnosis like, say, borderline personality disorder, provided that somebody was safe and motivated and it seemed like they could tolerate Ellie's place in its own way, even though it's supportive and nurturing, we intended to also be a challenging program as well. And people are going to be doing hard work in a rural setting. They're going to be learning these farming skills. So someone has to kind of be prepared to take some of that on in a really supportive environment. So there has to be that buy-in. And I think if we see that, the clinical symptoms are going to be less of a barrier.
I want to bring it back to Ellis, and also ask Carol from a board point of view. Capital campaign which, after you hear some of this, should sell itself. But it's a big one, and I'm curious. Some are curious about the level of government support you can access here. What's your understanding about how that will work versus the private sector support? Ellis, why don't you start?
I'm going to pass it over to Carol.
Okay.
You were about to jump in before Carol, so
thanks so very much to both of you. Amanda, if I could, with indulgence, just wanted to piggyback one comment on, because in my day-to-day life as a registered psychotherapist, I see this on a daily basis, the suffering and the issue of the revolving door, and that Ellie's Place really can offer the consistency and continuity on a daily basis with the supports built in that is entirely different than once a week of a therapeutic meeting. So invested in it hugely, because on my daily basis, I hear the tragedy. Having said that, let's move to the critical piece of how will we get there and raising those dollars. Certainly, it has been a challenge. So into government must hear and know that we don't wish to be a fee-for-service organization, that this is essential. And part of the reason we believe it's of value to the government is that it will indeed be cost saving, that the outcomes vis-a-vis homelessness or the unemployed and all of the cost factors that government does support ODSP would really be significantly reduced if, in fact, on the basis of even the numbers, we would be treating and providing recovery would be a significant factor. So we hope the government can hear when some of the fires have diminished in terms of COVID.
Anything to add, Ellis? Dodging altogether.
We've been having some discussions with government. We have some really strong supporters inside government, and we've really been trying to be balanced in our approach with government. We said, as a board, Ellie's Place will take on the responsibility of raising the capital to buy the property and build the buildings. We're asking the board to then step in and help us provide the operating funds to run it, so individuals don't have to pay a fee to go to it.
Yeah.
Similar to if you're going to hospital for any other service, they don't have to pay for that either.
Thank you. And Susan and John, you may have seen a question asked about the name of the program that your son attended, or I don't know if you're comfortable sharing it, but there's also a question about whether it was ultimately covered. I know that was part of what you went through, is figuring out whether any or all of it was covered. Where did all of that land?
None of it was covered. And it was a program at McLean Hospital in Boston called Appleton Program. And I would have loved him to have been able to stay there longer. He stayed 5 months. Yeah. We were very fortunate to be able to do that for him.
And we hope that he does get to go back as he had planned, that when the pandemic is over, there is a visit in his future as well. Is there, Joel, are there other models in other countries that you've looked at that also work as the basis for what might happen here?
Absolutely, yeah. There is literature from other countries. I think there's some studies out of Scandinavia. I think, Ellis, I know you kind of passed the buck. I can't think of any specific studies off the top of my head, but I know that there are other places around the world. Because we're sending our folks to the States, that's where a lot of our focus has been. But I don't know, Ellis, do you have anything to add to that?
I can't off the top of my head tell you which countries, but our researcher identified and gave us a literature review of 33 different programs around the world that all had extensive evaluative research, similar to the models that we're looking at.
And this is a question that I think probably Tamara could answer. Ellis, you might have a crack at it as well. Carol might too. But the average length of stay that's anticipated for a person in a residential facility, and what does readiness for discharge look like? How do you determine that? Tamara, why don't you start?
So our average length of stay is 9 to 12 months. Again, that's quite individualized, but that's, we're longer term residential. Anecdotally, I think we say like minimum 6. And I think all along we're looking at transition, whether they're transitioning to our program or transitioning back home. We really steadily help people get ready for that by doing either trial visits in the transition homes that they're going to, if they're staying in our program, or transitioning home for a trial visit and interviewing for volunteer positions and meeting with their treatment team at home, and then coming back to the farm and processing how that went. And maybe they're ready and maybe they're not, and they know that, and they need a little bit more time, and then they go. And so really doing it really cautiously and carefully.
We referenced, Joel, your work in helping others in the medical profession understand mental health issues better. And we know this has been a hill to climb for every citizen in the world in the last few decades. But inside your profession, what does that road look like now? And is there resistance to these kinds of the recovery model, for instance, the notion of lifelong care, and rethinking treatment as not the silver bullet that you think? I think some doctors like to think, when they're dealing with broken bones, it may be easier. But what is the resistance you find?
Well, I think that on an individual basis, I mean, most of my colleagues who I talk to are thinking along these lines. I mean, I think that there's a general trend, in the profession and culturally sort of towards this model, away from sort of the old traditional model, which I highlighted. That being said, I think the major barrier is sort of being, unfortunately, it's hard to prove these things, right? Like a lot of this is, they say, where's the evidence? And certain types of short-term therapies have their place, but they're also very easy to study. Like if I want to test the effectiveness of like a 8-week CBT program, well, I just enroll all the people in the program and follow them up in another 8 weeks, and then we're done. How do we test this? I mean, we almost have to build Ellie's place to prove it. Either that, or we look at the excellent research done, at some of the places in the States. Right. And, that is actually a big part of Ellie's place as well. On the models committee, we talk not only about, creating this place where people can heal, but also sort of becoming, our ambition has become a center of excellence where we're also going to be able to prove what we do. And generate research which can push this forward, not only in Ontario, but in other provinces and around the world. Because if in fact, as we think it will be the case, that we start helping people and we can make a real difference and save healthcare dollars, and we can prove it, that will progress things forward even more. But it's that huge first step. It's that initial investment that I think, and change is hard. I mean, I think that unfortunately, a lot of people have the attitude, when you talk about, the dream of Ellie's place, yeah, sure, that would be nice, but it's a real possibility. I mean, if we can make this happen and open the door, well, then we're that much closer, right?
And we've got a question about the therapeutic modalities that Ellie's place is contemplating, and I'm going to toss it out there. Ellis, Carol, Joel, any one of you, what's on the list? What are you thinking?
I don't know if you want to start, Ellis, or...
No, go ahead, Joel.
So, we're planning on having a multidisciplinary team that we're going to be meeting people where they're at in a lot of different ways. I mean, I think we imagine having, as part of the team, people who are not only going to be doing skills training in the farming disciplines, with the recognition that exercise and fresh air and hard work are a part of the healing. We're also going to have nurses and, a psychiatrist to supervise things like medication. We're going to have counselors and a psychotherapy component. That being said, a lot of this is going to, we have a big sort of overview look right now, because it's going to be influenced by the staff we hire and the clinical people who are going to develop the programs. So, on sort of a high level, we know that this type of model works with the emphasis on recovery. But as to what each person is going to bring to the fold, I think that remains to be seen. But I don't know, either Carol or Ellis want to comment further?
I would just add, Joel, that it's like a quilt of response. It is all interwoven and creates a whole. And I don't think the clinical will be present without the meditation, the art therapy, the structure of the day, the setting that it is in rural all of those components form this kind of protective quilt that will allow the healing.
We are unfortunately at time, and I'm gonna take a risk here and put Susan and John on the spot a little bit, because of your moving story and your experience, which is so very real. I have to ask what it means to you to contemplate the existence of Ellie's Place. If there had been an Ellie's Place for you and your family, closer to home, accessible, what would that have meant to you?
They're on mute.
Well, I mean, clearly it would have been a wonderful thing to have it here in Ontario. I think in society in Ontario, people really care, and we can do this. And it's up to the 145 people on this to spread the good word that good people are planning this and it can work. I mean, I did visit Theo on one occasion there, and Susan and his sisters did as well. And you know, these are profoundly powerful. One final comment I want to make in my own area of hospital medicine is we'll spend an awful lot of money trying to fix problems for people that are very expensive. This model can try and rehabilitate somebody for their life to be purposeful and contributing to society. So we're going to spend a lot of money on surgery, chemotherapy, radiotherapy for specific physical problems. We need to realize that this is actually long-term resuscitation of people to have long-term purposeful lives, and it's money very well spent.
Very well said. Thank you for that. It is unfortunately all we have time for. I want to just give my heartfelt thanks to all of you for your expertise, your presentations, your hearts in all of this. So important, and in helping move Ellie's Place forward. Thank you to all who've been here attending. Your support and presence here, of course, makes all the difference in the world. And there is a whole team behind the scenes here running the cameras and the webinars. So thank you for helping us get this off smoothly. To all attendees, you will receive an email in the coming days from Ellie's Place. It will include a recording of tonight's program. And there will also be some resources. There have been questions asked that are quite specific about programs, about Gould Farm, some very specific personal issues that we hope these resources will help to answer, and otherwise that we will try to reach out and help to answer any questions that you have. You can continue to follow Ellie's Place progress on the website, also on social media channels, and you can register to receive the newsletters. Just join me now in thanking Carol, Susan, John, Joel, Tamra, and Ellis, all of you for being here and for sharing your thoughts and your time. And for those of you attending, we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks to you all. Great to be with you.